We will begin by reciting the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. We'll do it in Tibetan today. I haven't prepared the English for the folks on the webcast or for the people who are here, so we'll just begin with it in Tibetan. O sanje chudan tsoki chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dagi jinso gibe sunam je drola penjir sanje drobar sho sanje chudan tsoki chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum je dagi jinso gibe sunam je Dola penjir sanje drobar sho sanje chedan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dane chapsum che dagi jinso ki besanam ki Dola penjir sanje drobar sho semjen tamje dewa tang dewe judan dembra juji donga ji judan rawa juji donga mebe dewa tampa tamin rawa juji Nyeden chata nitan rawe tanyon shambola nebra jorche. The Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious root Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so today, as we begin this class on Abhidharma, the first and most important thing we can do is to check our motivation. In general, by just participating in a class like this, it shows that you have some sort of a good motivation, but it's important that we remind ourselves to have as good a motivation as we possibly can at the outset especially. And so here we're beginning today probably around 8 weeks of classes, give or take, depending on how quickly we go through material. Some of the material is easier and we can go through quicker. Some of the material is quicker, we'll go through slower. We'll see how long it takes. But we'll basically go through until the chapters are finished. Be that as it may, as we do this, what we're talking about is the Dharma. We're talking about the teachings of the Buddha, and the reason why we study these. Of course, there are many reasons, and people are often interested in it out of pure intellectual curiosity, and that's not bad. It's actually quite good. But here in this monastery setting, especially, people who say we're Buddhists, it's important for us to start out with this motivation of thinking that we want to do it we want to do it out of a motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to bring all of our sentient beings, all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space to the state of Buddhahood. And in order to do that, we have to listen to and contemplate the Dharma, and so that's what we're doing now. Even if we can't really, or we don't really have that genuine motivation for that, at least to think to ourselves that we want to do it to achieve liberation for ourselves, or to bring as much benefit as we can out of these teachings. So please look at yourself and see what your actual motivation is. And then when you see what your actual motivation is, then you think, well, maybe I could make it better. And try to remind yourself to make it a little bit better. So this is important whenever we do study, even if it is a topic that is in some ways as, scholastic or perhaps even academic, maybe more scholastic is a better word, or as scholastic as Abhidharma. And so before we really begin with the topic of Abhidharma, it's important to first sort of explain why we're doing the class as we are doing, and we've got a number of different audiences. So basically, the situation is that the original plan was to have this class in Nama Buddha this year. We had a class last year. Last year we had a Tibetan language class, a Tibetan, Tibetan class, a translation workshop, and the Abhidharma class. We had the three, and it worked very well. And I was very excited to do the same thing this year, but there's a pandemic. And because of the pandemic, not only could we not hold the class in Nama Buddha, we couldn't even make it to Nama Buddha, basically. So we had to come here. So some of us managed to get here. So that's me. And then I don't know if you can see in the picture. You can't see in the picture. There are, for those of you watching over the internet, there are 4 people who, due to the kindness of Dungse Lama Pema Rinpoche and all of the people here at Trungpa Monastery, Canada, also came, and myself too. It's because of their kindness that I was able to kind. Ultimately, of course, it's Trungpa Rinpoche's kindness for building this monastery, but in the short term, it was Dungse Lama Pema who made it possible for us to come here and stay. But we also have people who had signed up to participate in this year's classes in Nama Buddha. And to just kind of say, well, we're done because of the pandemic seemed like too easy a solution. We want to try to keep things going as much as we can, despite the fact that we need to be careful of public health, and we need to what do we say? We need to be careful of public health. We need to be careful of our own health. We need to be certain that we're also providing a good example for everyone who is here. So everyone around the world. So we're not holding a class, mostly not in person. We're holding the class over the internet. And we're doing it on YouTube and Facebook, and also over the Gompa Services website. So we've got 3 at least. I'm not exactly certain what's happening technically, I have to admit. But we've got at least 3 different venues that it's happening over the web. So we've got people who are watching over the web. Now, in terms of doing this over the web, there are a couple of different reasons for using the YouTube and Facebook channels as opposed to doing it over an interactive media. Because I briefly considered this, but when we look at it, we have students who had signed up for the Abhidharma Tibetan and translation classes who are on at least 4 different continents, maybe 5 different continents. We've got students in Australia, South Asia, Europe, South America, North America. So that's 5 different continents. But because we're able to do this over the web, that means that it's not just the people who signed up to come to Nama Buddha, which is a relatively small number of people, because not everyone can take the time or go to the expense. And so there may be people who are now able to participate in the class who are everywhere. Hopefully there's some people in Africa, so that we have some people on all the different continents. At any rate, the more people who watch this from all over the world, then the better. But because we have people in so many different time zones, it would be difficult to find a time when we could actually do a live interactive class, just over the web. For example, when the Gyalwang Karmapa did the prayers for a time of pandemic a week or 2 ago, 2 weeks ago, I guess. 2 weeks ago. The prayers were held at 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, which was about as good time as you could get, I think, for most people in the world. But still, there are people who couldn't watch it live because they were asleep, or they had to stay up very late to watch it. And if we were to try to match that time, then we'd be holding these classes here at 6 or 7 in the morning, which on the one hand might not be so bad, but we do have the monastery schedule that we have to watch. We have to be able to fit in with the local place. So in order to fit the local schedule and to be able to have people watch the classes at a time when it's convenient to them, rather than staying up till 11 if you're in Europe, or watching at 1 in the morning in India, or getting up at, probably 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning in Australia. We're doing it over YouTube so that people who can watch it live and who want to watch it live can do that. people who are unable to watch it live can participate at a time that is convenient for you. So that's the reason why we're doing this. Now we also have, it's not just me here, we also have a group of 4 people who have come, we all came at about the same time from Asia, and we're here, and so they're also staying at the monastery, and so we're all staying together here. So it's not like we have people coming in from outside. You don't have to worry that we are opening up a place for people to come in and transmit the coronavirus to each other, because we're all here, staying here anyways. And they're all sitting, though you can't see it, they're all sitting 6 feet apart. 2 meters. Sorry, I'm in Canada. I have to say 2 meters. Or is it one caribou, as they advertised up in the Yukon Territory the other day. So 1 caribou apart. So that's kind of the external situation of the class. And but in a sense, this class is a continuation from the class that we had last year. I thought about whether I should just start over again from the beginning, because we're doing it to a whole different group of people, or should I just keep going from where we had got to? And I decided to keep going for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons why I think it's reasonable is that when you take a look at the Treasury of Avi Dharma, there are 8 different chapters. And the order of material in the 8 chapters is not necessarily entirely sequential. The chapters each teach their own topic, and they refer to things that are described in other chapters, but they don't assume that you know it, they assume that you already know it, even if it's something that's taught in another chapter. So the way it works is that when something that is explained in a different chapter is mentioned in the 3rd and 4th chapter, then it's just mentioned there, and it's assumed you either know it or will look it up or will learn it later. So it's not like you're actually missing that much of a systematic. There is a systematic reason, order for how the text is put together, but you're not actually missing. By starting in the middle, you're not missing as much as you would it's not like you're starting in the middle of a novel. When you start in the middle of the novel and you start at chapter 3 out of 8 chapters, then you've missed the entire exposition of the novel, and it's a little bit different with the Abhidharma. So even though even though many of you may be starting in the middle, it's not like you're missing too much. And the things that are explained in other chapters, we have to explain anyways, because we have to assume that many of the people who are watching or who even are here were not in last year's classes, and that most of you probably have not read the later chapters in the text anyways. And so we have to assume that something that's not taught in that chapter needs explanation anyways. So that's kind of the basis for how we're taking it. Now, the next point that we need to think about is why we would do the study of Abhidharma, other than it's one of the great philosophical texts of Buddhism, which it is. In particular, the Treasury of Avi Dharma by Vasubandhu, which is what we're basing our course on, is considered one of the 5 great treatises. When we talk about the 5 great treatises, we talk about Entering the Middle Way by Chandrakirti, we talk about the Commentary on Validity by Dharmakirti, the Duodotsawa, the Vinaya Sutras, when we talk about the Ornament of Clear Realization by Maitreya, and then this one, the Treasury of Avi Dharma. Now these are as described in the Tibetan tradition. So this Treasury of Avi Dharma is a text that distills the essence of one particular tradition of Avi Dharma. So when the Buddha taught the Dharma, then it was kind of categorized. The Buddha taught in all the sutras. The Abhidharma, it's not like there's a particular Abhidharma that the Buddha taught, but it was practiced at the time, but it was studied at the time, because the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis at the time of the Buddha would memorize the ideas and the concepts, and what they memorized, and they would memorize little, what you could say, like matrices or like little charts. But of course, they weren't doing charts written out, they were doing them in their mind. Those became the basis of the Abhidharma. And so later, there are many different schools that developed, but one of the most important ones is the Sarvastivada tradition of the Abhidharma. So this started from the time of the Buddha, the teachings were passed down, and then gradually as Buddhism spread, it broke into 18 different, didn't break, it divided into 18 different schools. Now they all got along together. They all recognized that each school was a legitimate school of Buddhism, but they had a different series of scriptures that they followed. And so one of these is the Sarvastivada tradition, which then spread widely in North India. So this is particularly in the area of Kashmir. So this text comes from that tradition. Now, in that tradition, this Sarvastivada tradition later came to be called the Vaibhashika, in Sanskrit called the Vaibhashika, in Tibetan it's a Chiratmawa, and in English we'd say the Great Exposition School. The reason it's called this is that over the centuries, the Kashmiri masters compiled a great collection of the Abhidharma called the Great Exposition of the Abhidharma, essentially. I'm not getting the title exactly right. I don't remember the exact title, but everyone calls it the Great Exposition. This is a massive collection. Because it was massive, it was very, very thorough. But it is too much to study at the beginning. So it's like an encyclopedia of everything in Buddhism. And so later, in the 4th century, Vasubandhu condensed the main points of this into his 8-chapter Treasury of Avi Dharma, or in particular, the verses on the Treasury of Avi Dharma, which is a set of, 750 verses? I should have looked it up before. I just didn't even think that I was going to talk about the number of verses. It's about 750 or so verses that condense the meaning of the Great Exposition. And this is such a masterful exposition of the main points of it, really condensing the points of the Abhidharma into a short and easily digestible, into a short and easily memorizable form that we can all study. And so and learn. It makes it easier. Rather than having to learn a 16-volume text, you have these 750 verses, which is something that's fairly easy to memorize. Particularly, it was easy to memorize before we all relied on paper and computers. Our memories are getting worse. These days, we think memorizing 750 verses of philosophy is difficult, we think. But actually, if you have trained your memory, and for people who worked primarily orally, as people did before there were printing presses and so forth, memorizing was a very, very common way of learning sutras and so forth. So there's a lot of memorization. So basically, these verses are meant to be easily memorizable little keys that remind you of the major points. When you read the verses on their own, they don't necessarily make sense at first. They sort of make sense, but you feel like there's a lot missing. But they give you the little words that are little keys that you remember, oh yeah, there's that. This is what this means. So the verses on their own are not entirely comprehensible. Now, I should have said this at the beginning of the talk. Those of you who are watching over the webcast, the texts that we are going through, including this root text, the verses of the Abhidharma, are available online in PDF form. If on the YouTube screen, you will see that below in the description below, there are the links. I'm not a huge YouTube person, so I don't know exactly what it's called. But basically, underneath the video, if you haven't put it out to full screen, underneath the video, there's a description. And in that description, there is a link to PDFs of the commentary and the root text. So before we get to those, you might consider clicking on those links now and downloading them in the background as we continue the class. Okay? So I hope that's all clear. Just take a look in there and see about the descriptions. At any rate, there's the eight chapter verses on the Treasury of Avi Dharma that are great mnemonic, basically. Then Vasubandhu taught this, and his students at the time really found it extremely helpful. But they said, well, we're going to forget all your explanations. Could you please, I don't know exactly what they said, but the gist of what they said is that they said that they're in danger of forgetting all of his explanations. Could you please write a commentary on that? And so Vasubandhu then wrote the auto commentary on this. And so there's the verses on the Treasury of Avi Dharma are called in Sanskrit the Abhidharma Koshakarika. And then you have the Abhidharma Kosha Bhashyam, which is the auto commentary. In Tibetan we call it the Dzurangja. So these are the kind of like the two main texts. Now the auto commentary on the Abhidharma, it's a wonderful text, but it doesn't cover everything in complete detail. And so then Yashamitra, Jinaputri Yashamitra, then composed a long, extensive commentary on that. And then there are other commentaries written in Sanskrit, notably one by Purnavardhana and then by other masters. And then it was brought to Tibet. And when it was brought to Tibet, it was translated in the early phase by Bande Kalapaltsek, who was a translator at the time of Chisung Detsen, so the very beginning of the spread of Buddhism in Tibet. And the Tibetan translation is pretty much universally recognized as an excellent translation. If you compare the Tibetan and the Sanskrit, it's an excellent, very good translation. So sometimes people think that, the Sanskrit must be better, but in this case, the Tibetan is also very good, both for the verses and for the Rangtel. The Rangtel is, the auto commentary is very clear in Tibetan. Later, there was, as the traditions of study developed in Tibet, there were, of course, the other translations of all the other Indian commentaries, and also Tibetan masters began to write their own commentaries. A notable one is Chim Jamyang, who wrote his text called The Ornament of Abhidharma. Now, if I were in Namo Buddha, I would hold up my copy so that you could see the copy of the book. But I don't have that copy of the book with me. I have an electronic version of it on my iPad, but holding that up is just not going to be the same. So at any rate, it's an excellent translation called The Ornament of the Abhidharma by Chim Jambayang, translated by Ian Coughlin, who is, I believe, a professor in Australia, if I remember correctly. But it's a very good translation. And so for those of you who wish to do additional study, then this is an excellent resource to look at. Now, it's got different word choices. It's a different style than my translations that we're going to be teaching from, but it's also very, very good. So the Chim Jamyang, so then the traditions passed down, and within our Karma Kaju tradition, starting from the time of the 7th Karmapa Churachas, there began the tradition of, actually it started earlier, but got really formalized under Churachatso of studying and having a Shedra. So before there had been a lot of study in the Karma Kaju tradition, but it was kind of informal, and it was formalized into a Shedra or a monastic college at the time of the 7th Karmapa Churachatso. And the 7th Karmapa wrote a commentary on the commentary of validity. And then the 8th Karmapa Mikyo Dorje wrote commentaries on all the other 4 great texts. So in the Karma Kaju tradition, we have commentaries by the 7th and 8th Karmapas on all of the 5 major philosophical texts. But all of these commentaries they're massive. The commentary, Churachas's commentary on the works of Dignaga and Dharmakirti is 2 volumes. Mikyo Dorje's commentary on the Abhidharma is 2 volumes. His commentary on the Vinaya is 3 volumes. The commentary on the Ornament of Clear Realization is 2 volumes. I think the commentary on the Entering the Middle Way is 1 big fat volume. It's a very thick volume. So they're all massive works. They're very, very thorough, and they're brilliant commentaries. However, when you first start studying the Abhidharma or any of these topics, they're very difficult to get into because there's so much other stuff going on in there, which is all really fascinating and brilliant. But when you're a beginner, starting out with that material is very difficult. So for that reason, the Shamar Kunchuk Yenlak and the Ninth Karmapa then wrote shorter commentaries on most of these works. Among these shorter commentaries is Youthful Play by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje. So this is the text that we will be studying now. So I'll show you the book. I'll hold it up. We're doing show and tell. So this one I have a copy here. It was in the library. So now, if you want to order a copy of this, it's available. I have to do the commercial. If you want to order a copy of this, it's available online from KDD Publications at namsebangsobook.com. There is a link in the description on the YouTube page. However, because we're just starting now, and because of the pandemic has slowed down shipping quite a bit, especially to foreign countries, or international, I should say. The international shipping, I'm no longer sure where a foreign country is. Anyway, shipping internationally seems to be a bit slower these days. So for that reason, we put the PDF on the website also of just these two chapters. But if you want to study the whole thing, you can purchase this book there or from your other favorite bookseller. So this commentary by Wangchuk Dorje was studied, but from the time of the 10th Karmapa, because of political difficulties in Tibet, entirely because of political difficulties, the Karma Kagyu tradition of study kind of waned severely. The whole Karma Kagyu tradition had a very big setback at that time, just related to political situations, and for a while it was not really possible to continue formal study in the Karma Kagyu tradition. So many texts were lost, among them this text by Wangchuk Dorje. It wasn't entirely lost, but a copy of the text was kept in a library at the Potala, but it was, for all intents and purposes, unavailable for people to study for many years, until just very recently. But the other main texts of Mikyo Dorje and Chodai Gyatso were preserved, and they were continued to be taught, although on a smaller scale than they had been earlier. And so those traditions continued, and particularly they got going stronger again in the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, and new editions of them were prepared at Palpung Monastery in Tibet. And then later, when the Gyalwang Karmapa came to, the 16th Gyalwang Karmapa came to Rumtek in Sikkim, they had new editions prepared then, or if they reprinted this, I'm not exactly certain about the history about it, but there are Rumtek editions as well. And so their texts were preserved for the main texts, but these shorter commentaries were still inaccessible until something like, I think, 2001 or 2002, when the 17th Gyalwang Karmapa managed to get a copy of this text by Wangchuk Dorje and had it reprinted first by, there are two editions that came out at that time, one by the Sherabling that was in the traditional Tibetan Pecha format, and then a book format from the Vajravidya Library in Varanasi. And this is it's a very short commentary. It's about probably 2/3 of the length or half the length of the auto commentary. It's about probably 1/3 or 1/4 of the length of Mikyo Dorje's commentary. And it primarily focuses on giving just an explanation of the words. So it's not giving the entire depth of everything, but for people who are first studying Abhidharma, if you had the entire depth of everything, you'd be overwhelmed. So this is an excellent text to start out with. It was like for the beginning of the Abhidharma, and even at that, it's still not that small a book, even as one that's just giving the shorter version. So this is like something that you can read as like a beginning, to get an idea, to get an overview of the Abhidharma. Then once you have that overview of the Abhidharma, then you can study texts like the Chim Abhidharma that I mentioned before. You can also study the auto-commentary on the Treasury of Avi Dharma, which has been translated. It was translated from the Sanskrit, I think with reference to a lot of Chinese and Tibetan materials. It's translated into French by a Belgian scholar, Louis Vallée de la Poussin, in the early 20th century. That edition was then translated by Leo Pruden into English in, I think, the late 1960s or 1970s, and or maybe a little bit later, somewhere around in there. It's been in the latter half of the last century. I feel so old when I say that. And so that's a 4-volume edition, but it was primarily published for academics, and it's very difficult and to find and expensive when you do find it. It was also translated by a monk named Lodra Sampo, who lives in Nova Scotia, and he translated it. It was published by the Motilal Banarasidas publication house in India, and that was a very good, affordable alternative for several years there until it went out of print. And so now the copies of that are also difficult to find. In any case, both of those are excellent resources to look at as well. So once we've gone through this, or if you want to supplement the classes now, then you can look at those materials as well. Okay, so that's the the basic thing. But what we're primarily focusing on now are this teachings, this commentary by Wangchuk Dorje, the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje. Now, in terms of putting the whole, before we start, and because we're starting at the 3rd chapter, we first have to kind of go back and get an idea, the overall structure of the work, before we can just dive into the 3rd chapter. There are some teachers who would just dive in and open up and start from the beginning of the 3rd chapter, but I think it's important to go back, because for those of you who were in the class last year, it's been a year and you need a refresher. For those of you who were not in the class last year, you don't know what's going on. And so we have to give you a little bit of a background on what's going on in order that you can kind of make sense of it. So there are 8 chapters in the Treasury of Avi Dharma. And basically, the text opens up with a discussion of what Abhidharma itself is. It begins with an homage, of course. We always start any text, Buddhist text starts with an homage to the Buddha or a teacher or so forth. And then it starts with a pledge to compose, a declaration of your intent, like making a promise to finish the work, because once you've made a promise, then you've got more impetus to actually do it. And then it goes into a description of what Abhidharma is. And so this is an important thing that we have to look at, just talk a little bit about. And the reasons for talking. So basically what Abhidharma is Abhidharma is prajna. Prajna means the ability to discern what is or is not. So really, when we talk about Abhidharma, we're talking about undefiled prajna, the prajna that sees the nature of the truths, as well as that goes along with it, which means like the other 5 aggregates or the other aggregates that accompany it. So that's what we actually mean by Abhidharma. It's that prajna that discerns the nature of the truths. And here, since we're talking about this in terms of the Great Exposition tradition, we're talking about the 4 noble truths here. In the Mahayana, we'd focus more on the ultimate and the relative. Here, we focus more on the 4 noble truths, so seeing the nature of the 4 noble truths. That's what that's the prajna that we're talking about. And that also is accompanied by the other 5 aggregates. Not only is there that prajna, there's also the consciousness and the feeling, the contact, and so forth, the volition, all the other mental factors, and so forth. Those are all part of it. And then it also includes the treatises by which we learn it, as well as the experience that we develop on the path to get to it. So we've got scriptural Abhidharma is the text. That's this book. This is scriptural Abhidharma. We have path Abhidharma, which is kind of like the process we go through to achieve the ultimate Abhidharma, which is the prajna that realizes the nature of the Four Noble Truths. Does that make sense to you? Some of you are looking at me. Some of you who shouldn't be looking puzzled are looking puzzled. You were here last year. You were there last year. So these are the three types. We've got the ultimate Abhidharma as a prajna. Path Abhidharma is kind of our progress, the wisdom we develop as we get there. And then we have the scriptural Abhidharma, which is the texts by which we learn it. So when you talk about I'm studying Abhidharma, what are we studying? Well, we are trying to achieve that ultimate prajna by going through the texts and then listening to them, contemplating them, and then eventually meditating, right? So that's the process that we're going through. So that's what we're talking about with Abhidharma. Now, when we're talking about Abhidharma, then that basically, what that means is that we need to be able to distinguish what all things are. If we're going to look at the nature, we have to be able to see, well, what is defiled? What is undefiled? In other words, this is like the main topic of this book. How do we know what is defiled? What is something that we need to give up? What is something that's going to cause pain, going to cause suffering, or that is pain and is suffering? How do we know what is undefiled? That means that which is not accompanied by the afflictions, that which is actually bringing us towards enlightenment. So how do we know which is which? That's why we're studying the Abhidharma. We're not studying Abhidharma as some way to just gain more knowledge, even though gaining more knowledge is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with gaining more knowledge. But that's not our main reason. If you have knowledge but you don't use it, it doesn't benefit you. And the benefit that we, in particular, here are looking at is the benefit of achieving liberation. In the Great Exposition, we'd say achieving liberation for ourselves, because it's a foundation vehicle school. But we can also use this, even if we take it as a Mahayana attitude, as using this as a basis for, if we understand what is defiled and undefiled ourselves, then we can be able to benefit other sentient beings, bring them to Buddhahood as well. So we need to develop that prajna that distinguishes defiled and undefiled phenomena. So when we have these defiled and undefiled phenomena, then phenomena are huge. You can't, and when you go through all phenomena, there's no way you can study each individual phenomena, because if you had to first start out with learning about cows, horses, donkeys, cats, and all this, and then you'd spend your entire life going through all the different types of animals before you even got to the next category. So that's not the way we do it. So instead of going through individual phenomena, we kind of categorize things in different ways, and in order to make it easy to understand them. So for that reason, because things are categorized in the Abhidharma teachings, sometimes it's not like what we expect, and it seems kind of dry, because we're getting a very condensed thing that's talking about things in technical terms using names of categories. Rather than talking about specific life situations, we're talking about categories. So the trick to what we have to do in studying the Abhidharma is we have to take these teachings that we're getting about kind of technical things and then take them and apply them to our own lives. As is often said, when we're studying, we have to make the study into an antidote for our own afflictions. We have to make it into something that's going to improve us, make us better people, help us eliminate our own negative aspects. And so for that reason, we have to understand what things are and how they work. And we get that understanding on kind of a general level by dividing things into categories such as defiled and undefiled, the categories of the 5 bases of the noble, the categories of the 5 aggregates, and so forth, and all that. So, or the categories of the 4 noble truths, and we learn what the categories are like, and then we take that and then we apply it to our own minds, to our own selves, to look at our own experience. So in terms of the way things are set up in the Treasury of Avi Dharma, there are 8 different chapters, and each of these chapters takes a different aspect of this. The first 2 chapters taken together give a general presentation of phenomena. The first chapter presents the 5 aggregates, 12 sense bases, and the 18 elements, and talks about all the different aspects of these. So when you go through the first chapter, you kind of learn what exactly do we mean by form? What falls under the category of form? What do we mean by the 12 sense bases? What do we mean by the 18 elements? What is the overlap between these? What is different between these different categories? And so how do we fit these things together? And by putting it together, at first it seems like you're just looking at a bunch of different categories, but then if you start actually looking at your own experience and saying, okay, what is this going on in my mind? How does this work? Then it becomes helpful. And it also provides a kind of conceptual basis for understanding the teachings of the Buddha, because this is the conceptual basis, the conceptual structure that he gave in all of the sutras. So it's got that kind of dual usage. Then in the second chapter, it's primarily talking about, it's called the Teachings on the Faculties. So it's talking about other aspects of composite phenomena primarily. It's talking about the 22 different faculties. Do you remember the 22 faculties? I'm not going to quiz you today. The 22 faculties, you've got the non-concurrent formations. What are those? One of them's going to know. What are those? Well, that was last year. We'll get to it. Then also how things arise, how things come out of karmic cause and effect. So basically, these first 2 chapters are kind of giving us the general overview of phenomena. Following that, the rest of the Treasury of Avi Dharma can be thought of as a presentation of the 4 Noble Truths. The way it's the presentation of the 4 Noble Truths, we got the 4 Noble Truths are what? They're suffering, the origin of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the path. These 4, right? Suffering, what do we mean by suffering? Well, suffering, the truth of suffering does not refer to some external idea. It's not an external, there's no equation for the truth of suffering. It is not a cosmic principle. The actual truth of suffering is defiled phenomena that are results of karma and afflictions. It's the defiled phenomena that are results. That means your body is the truth of suffering. This cup is the truth of suffering. The iPad is certainly a truth of suffering. Sometimes it's a truth of suffering, right? So there are all these different things. And you might look at them and think they aren't. Why is that suffering? But you have to remember the different types of suffering: the suffering of change, or suffering of change, and the suffering of pervasive suffering of formation, which we discussed last year at length. Right? So that's a review. But in general, when we think about it, if the results of karma and afflictions, that is what the truth of suffering is. Well, what is that result? It is the world. So that's what's taught in the 3rd chapter, the world. And then the 4th chapter, the teaching is teachings on karma. So what does the world come out of? The world comes out of the truth of origin, and the truth of origin has 2 parts. The first part is karma, the actions that create the world. And then that karma comes out of afflictions. So karma is taught in the first, karma is taught in the 4th chapter, which we'll cover this year. And then the afflictions are taught in the first 90%, the first 80%, the first main portion of the 5th chapter. The teachings on kernels. That's next year. At the end of the 5th chapter, there is a section that talks about the perfect knowings. What happens when you have abandoned the kernels? That is the truth of cessation. So the 5th chapter has 2 parts. The first part teaches the afflictions, and the second part teaches the truth of cessation. So taken together, the 4th chapter and the first part of the 5th chapter teach the truth of origin. The last half of the truth of the 5th chapter teaches the truth of cessation. Then the 6th chapter on the paths and individuals teaches the truth of the path. The paths, that's what it's talking about. And then the 7th and the 8th chapter talk about the different types of samadhis and absorptions and qualities that arise through the practice of the path. And so they're like an ancillary aspect of the path. Okay, so in this way we can say that the Treasury of Avi Dharma on a whole, after an introduction that teaches the general nature of phenomena, then teaches the 4 Noble Truths. So this year we are starting with the 3rd chapter, Teachings on the World. And so this is teaching the truth of suffering. Okay? So it's suffering because it is the result of karma and afflictions. It is suffering because it is impermanent. It is suffering because we experience pain. That's suffering of suffering. It's suffering because it's impermanent. That's suffering of change, especially in the higher realms. And it's suffering because there's the subtle impermanence of change, of arising and perishing in every instant. That's the pervasive suffering of formation. So that's in kind of, if we describe it in terms of what we discussed last year with the 3 types of sufferings. So there, now we've actually come to the 3rd area, the teachings on the world. And we won't go through too much today because we've had a long introduction. So if you open up you have 2 PDFs on your screen. You have hopefully you have downloaded them by now. If you download the PDF, open up the one on the commentary. And you will see it says the 3rd area, Teachings on the World, and then there are 2 stanzas. And these stanzas, this commentary is the commentary by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje. The title of the commentary is Youthful Play, the commentary on the Treasury of Avi Dharma. And so this chapter opens, as each of the chapters in the Treasury of Avi Dharma, it opens with an homage and a pledge to compose written by the Ninth Karmapa. So these are the Ninth Karmapa's words. It says, "Unstained by ignorance, your wisdom sees all that is knowable directly and unhindered. Lord of 10 powers and all-knowing Guru, jewel of the Shakyas, I bow to you respectfully." So this prayer here, this is an homage to the Ninth Karmapa's teacher, Shamar Kunchuk Yenak, or sometimes he's named Kunchuk Bang. Sometimes he's called by a bunch of different names, but Jewel of the Shakyas is a reference to his name, Kunchuk. Kunchuk means jewel in Tibetan, right? So Jewel of the Shakyas, that's a reference to his name. So he is the teacher from whom Wangchuk Dorje studied the Abhidharma. So Kunchuk Yenak was a student of the 8th Karmapa who wrote the great commentary, the massive one, and then he taught this great commentary to Kunchuk Yenak, who then taught it to Wangchuk Dorje. So that is why he's making that prostration here. The treasury that teaches the world from Abhidharma's treasury is like a reflection in this mirror, taught clearly and precisely, just as all-knowing Vasubandhu explained, and without mistakes. This is a feast for those who have minds of intelligence and interest. So basically he's saying he's going to try to present the teachings of this clearly. It's like a reflection in a mirror. Just like you can see every pore in your skin when you're looking in a mirror if you have your glasses on and you're close enough. Then similarly you can see every detail in the mirror of this chapter. Of course, as I said before, this is not every single detail. We'll fill in a few details. At any rate, the text continues, with these verses as a link between chapters, the 3rd area, the teachings on the world, as an explanation of the text of the area and a presentation of the area's name. So basically, this is starting from the previous chapter and going now, we've finished the 3rd chapter, gone into the 2nd chapter, going into the 3rd chapter. And this 3rd chapter has 2 different parts. The world of sentient beings, and first is the world of sentient beings, and the second is the world that contains them. So here, when we talk about world, the first thing we have to think about is what actually the meaning of the world is, because we have a different understanding of the world, meaning of the word world in English, then there's the Sanskrit word loka, or it's a similar, but I think the Sanskrit is a little bit broader or more explicitly broader. When you use the word loka in Sanskrit, and also to a certain extent in the modern Indic languages, the loka refers both to the external world environment and also to the sentient beings within it. So it's like, it can also mean like society. Now, of course, there are different words for society as well, but it's like a collection of people and beings as well as the world. Whereas when we say the word world in English, we tend to think more of the physical and outer environment and not so much of the internal sentient beings. So here, this is a little bit of a linguistic issue when we're saying the world of sentient beings. In Sanskrit, oh yeah, of course the word loka, and there's the laukika for like worldly people. These are related ideas. And so it's somewhat there in English, but not as, I don't think it's quite as strong as in Sanskrit. And then there's the world of sentient beings and the world of the environment. So these are the two main sections of the chapter, right? So it begins with the section on the world of sentient beings. Now, within each of these, there are different sections. So Tibetan texts are set up with a very, what we call an outline. So every part has different parts. And when you keep these parts in mind, then it helps you conceptualize the text. Remember where you are, and remember how it's structured, and remember what's related to each other. At first, it might seem annoying, but when you get used to it, it gives you an idea of what relates to what. So the first part, the world of sentient beings, has 5 topics. So there are 5 different parts to it. The first is the classification of wanderers who are born. So in other words, wanderers here is a synonym for sentient beings. So what are the different types of sentient beings? The second part is the nature of interdependence, the manner of birth. So how do we take birth? And that's through the 12 links of interdependence. So that's the second major part, or the second subtopic. The third part is the conditions for abiding after birth. So how is it that once you have been born in the world, what is it that a sentient being needs to continue staying in the world? The fourth section is the minds of staying and dying. What types of cognition do you have at the different stages of your various existences? And then the last section is categorizing beings into 3 groups. So these are the 5 main sections. And of these 5 main sections, we begin with the first, the classifications of wanderers who are born. And this also has 3 different topics: classification into 3 realms, classifying wanderers in 5, and classifying in the 4 modes of birth. So we have different ways of classifying sentient beings. It's like when you categorize phenomena in different ways, then each different way you categorize them gives you a different way to understand them structurally. So they're not exclusive of each other. They're overlapping different ways of thinking about it. When you look at them in terms of where they are, where they've been reborn, then we talk about them in terms of the classifications of the 3 realms. Or you can think about them similarly, you can think about in terms of the 5 wanderers, or you can think about them in terms of the manner, the modes of birth. These are all different ways of classifying sentient beings. So first we have the classifications in the 3 realms. So this has the 3 topics: the desire realm, form realm, and formless realm. So we have these 3 main realms. Now in English we often talk about 6 realms of samsara. We talk about 3 realms of samsara. In Tibetan and Sanskrit, these 2 are a little bit different. They're different terms. It's either 6 classes. So it's 6 classes or 5 classes. It's a little different word than realm. And then there's the kamsum korwa, the 3 realms. And we translate kam as realm. We translate both of these as realm in English, even though neither of them really quite exactly, or even very close, gets to the word realm. But these are the terms that we use. So when we talk about the 3 realms, you have to be careful that it's a kind of different understanding than when we talk about 6 realms or 5 realms. So the 3 realms are the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. So we're going to be speaking about these a little bit, and I think what I'll do is I'll just go through the desire realm today, and then we'll call that a class for today. The desire realm has 2 points. There's the general classification and the specific classification. The general classification is hell's hungry ghosts and animals and humans and 6 types of gods are the desire realm. So these are the different types of beings in the desire realm. Just the names of the commentary reads, just the names of the 3 realms have been mentioned. But what are the 3 realms, you ask? So here what this is saying. Well, in the first and the second chapter, we talked over and over again about the 3 realms. We talked about the desire realm. We talked about the form realm, the formless realm. We talked about which mental factors are present on which realm. We talked about the different, which elements and which sense bases are present in which realm and which ones are absent. And all of that in great detail, but we didn't actually describe what are the form realm, the desire realm, form realm, and formless realm. And so now we're getting to the point where we have to describe what exactly is the desire realm, what is the form realm, what is the formless realm, what are the differences, how do different sentient beings get categorized in them. When we talk about sentient beings, we know about the most common classification of sentient beings that we know is the six classes of sentient beings, the 6 realms of samsara, the 6 classes. We've got hells, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, demigods, and gods. Well, the demigods are an interesting case. We'll get to them probably tomorrow. They can be included either among the hungry ghosts or in the gods, but they don't need to be counted separately, so we're left with 5, if I've got my fingers out right. Anyways, we've got 5 realms of samsara. So now when or the 5 realms, or the 5 classes of beings. And so in order to teach that, what the 3 realms are, we have to understand how these different types of beings fit within these 3 realms. So the connection, so this area is intended to teach what the 3 realms are, and the connection between the chapters in terms of meaning is that the individuals who wish for liberation should, among the 4 truths, internalize the characteristics and the character basis of the truth of suffering first. So the first thing we have to understand is when you're trying to understand the 4 noble truths, the first one you have to come to understand is the truth of suffering. So that is why this chapter is presented first. And when you understand the truth of suffering, when you can truly understand the nature of the world and of sentient beings, this develops weariness with the world, it is said. The more you understand the nature of samsara, the less you want to be in it. Now, we've come to the actual meaning of the verse. The actual meaning of this verse is as follows. So we've got these, it says, hells, hungry ghosts, and animals, and humans, and 6 types of gods are the desire realm. So beings in hells are led there by non-meritorious causes that do not have even the slightest pleasant result and cannot find protection until extricated by the full ripening of karma. That is, once you are born in hell, you are stuck there until the karma that propelled your birth there is done. The hungry ghosts are overwhelmed by hunger and thirst, and there are the bent goers, or animals, who bend as they go, and humans are predominantly mental. So here, these 4, the names of them, when you think about the Sanskrit names, you've got Naraka for the hells, and Preta for the hungry ghosts, Tiryaka for the animals, and Manusha for the humans. The names of each of these, the Naraka means people who've been reborn there because of the non-meritorious causes. That's what the name indicates, the suffering of the hells. Preta, the hungry ghosts, we can get an idea of it from the name in English, which is actually more of a translation of the Chinese term, I believe. So the hungry ghosts are overwhelmed by hunger and thirst. Humans, or the animals, they walk on 4 legs instead of standing up straight, so therefore they are, they bend as they go, Tiryaka, or in Tibetan, Dundro. And then humans are predominantly mental. The word for mind, one of the words for mind in Sanskrit is manas. And so the manusha for human is a derivative of that word. So it's talking about humans. We have the capacity of intelligence, or a greater capacity of intelligence. And the 6 types of gods of desire have their places in the sky. including their environment or container, these are the desire realm. So you've got here, in the desire realm, we've got 4.5 of the 5 classes of beings. The hells, the hungry ghosts, animals, and humans are all entirely contained within the desire realm. There are no humans who are in the form or formless realm. They might have achieved the samadhis to be reborn there in the future, but they're still in, their bodies are still in the desire realm. So these 4 classes are entirely in the desire realm. Then you've got the 5th class, gods. And among the gods, you have the gods of the desire realm, the gods of the formless realm, and the gods of the desire, form, and formless realms, these 3 other realms. So among these gods, then there are the 6 levels of gods in the desire realm. And so these are the levels of the 4 great kings, the heaven of the 33. You've got the conflict-free, the joyous mastery of emanations, and mastery of others' emanations. These are the 6 realms of the desire realm gods. And so these are all in the desire realm. When we talk about them as being in the desire realm, why is it called the desire realm? It's because now in the realms, actually, you have your own particular type of desire. It's not like the form and the formless realms are free of desire, but they're subtler forms of desire. And in particular, in the desire realm, beings have desire for food and sexual pleasure. So that's the 2 types of desire that characterize the desire realm. That is why we call it the desire realm. So in this way, we have these 5 different categories of the desire realm. Now, if we look at it we can also bring it out to even more categories. The specific classification, by dividing the hells and continents, there are 20. So we have the 5 realms. So basically, you can say that there are, well, we have the 4 for, when we talk about the 4, in the previous verse we had the 4 for the hells, hungry ghosts, animals, and humans, that's 4. Then we had 6 for the gods, a total of 10, right? Then with if we divide the hells into 8, so when you divide the hells into 8, the least bad of the hells is the reviving hell, then you have black line hell, crushing hell, wailing hell, great wailing hell, the hot hell, the extremely hot hell, and then the Avicii. What is it in English? Unrelenting is another translation. What did I use in this book? And then it doesn't matter. So there's those 8 realms of the hot realm. So that means that with those 8 of the hot realms, of the hell realms, plus the 8 hot hells, plus the animals and the hungry ghosts, you've got 10 lower realms. Now, we of course also have the 8 cold hells, and we also have the surrounding, or the occasional and the neighboring hells, but they are all kind of situated near the 8 hot hells, so they are considered at the same level. We don't count them separately. If you counted them separately, we'd have a lot more, and there are other classifications not listed here where they do list them all separately, but here we're just talking about the 8 levels of hell, hungry ghosts, and animals. The hungry ghosts and the animals are kind of not separated out because they aren't in specific separate locations the way each of the 8 different hot hells is. Okay? Then we have the human realm. Now in the human realm, the humans are on the 4 different continents, but there's a long way between each of the 4 different continents, as you will see when we get to the teaching on the outer world. So you've got the continent in the east, superior body. We've got the rose apple land, or Jambudvip. In the south, we've got Gaudaniya, or the bountiful cow, in the west, and unpleasant sound, Uttarkuru, in the north. We've got these 4 continents. So the humans on these 4 are kind of too far apart from each other to have much communication, so they're 4 different places. That's dividing the humans into 4. And then you've got 6 of the gods. So you've got the 10, that's 10 of the higher realms. So 10 higher realms and 10 lower realms makes 20. Clear? Okay. So that is the desire realm. And then the realms, it's hard to kind of differentiate these realms. We're talking about the sentient beings primarily, but it's hard to differentiate that entirely from the physical location. So we're talking a little bit about the physical location here. But the physical locations will be described in much more detail in the second half of this chapter. And so I think that should be enough for today. So I would like to ask you all to please dedicate the merit of listening to and teaching the Dharma as representative of all merit done in the 3 times, so that all sentient beings may be freed from temporary suffering, and particularly the temporary suffering of epidemic that is plaguing our world now, and then come to a state of perfect happiness and omniscience. So please, thinking this way, let's recite the dedication of merit. O sanam de tam che se bani tom ne nye pedranam pam che ne Kega na chi pa la tro bai si be tso le ro wa shong. Thank you.